Every night's like every other night.
No, not tonight.
What's different?
I don't know. Something in the way my heart beats. As if something very good were going to come out of tonight.
Hollywood has always been a place where people came to reinvent themselves. And more often than not, the reinvention was necessary. Behind some of the most celebrated faces in the history of American cinema were childhoods that nobody would have chosen. Here are 20 Golden Age Hollywood stars who were raised by cruel parents, and what they lived through before the cameras ever found them. Number 20. Judy Garland. Frances Ethel Gum was performing on stage before she started school. Her parents ran a vaudeville theater in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and her mother, Ethel Gum, saw in her youngest daughter something she intended to exploit as completely as possible. Ethel pushed all three of her daughters into performing, but it was Frances, who became Judy Garland, who had the talent that Ethel decided her entire future would be built around. When MGM signed Garland in 1935, Ethel's control over her daughter's career tightened rather than relaxed. The studio prescribed amphetamines to keep Garland thin and energetic on set, and barbiturates to bring her down enough to sleep. A chemical cycle that Ethel facilitated and that began when Garland was 13 years old. Ethel managed Judy's salary, took a percentage, and was described by Garland in later years as someone who had treated her not as a daughter, but as a commercial property. Garland's marriages, 5 of them, and her decades of addiction and breakdown were the long aftermath of a childhood that had given her almost none of the things a child requires, and all of the things a performer is supposed to be able to manufacture on demand. She died in London on June 22, 1969, at the age of 47. Number 19. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich's daughter, Maria Riva, wrote a memoir in 1992 that described what it was like to be raised by one of the most glamorous women in the world. The answer, in short, was cold. Dietrich was attentive to her daughter's usefulness as an accessory and largely indifferent to her needs as a child. She involved Maria in her professional life, parading her through European society, later through Hollywood, while maintaining an emotional distance that Riva described as total and consistent. Born Marie Magdalene Dietrich in Berlin in 1901, Dietrich lost her father when she was 6 and was raised by her mother and stepfather in a household that was strict and emotionally austere. The emotional unavailability she passed on to her own daughter appears, in Maria Riva's account, to have been the direct inheritance of the childhood she had herself experienced. Dietrich's on-screen persona, coolly erotic, entirely self-contained, available to no one, was not entirely a performance. Maria Riva's memoir remains one of the most detailed accounts of what a screen goddess looked like from the inside of her household. Marlene Dietrich died in Paris on May 6, 1992, at the age of 90. Number 18. Joan Crawford. If one name dominates the subject of Hollywood parents behaving badly, it is Joan Crawford, and specifically Christina Crawford's 1978 memoir, Mommy Dearest, which described a childhood of physical punishment, emotional cruelty, and arbitrary deprivation at the hands of a woman who presented as a model of glamour and generosity to the outside world. Born Lucille Fay LeSueur in San Antonio, Texas in 1904, Crawford had her own brutal childhood: an absent father, a cold mother, a stepfather who regarded her with contempt. She worked as a laundress and a waitress before she was a teenager. What she passed on to her adopted children, according to Christina's account, was a version of the same relentless demands and random cruelties that had been applied to her. Crawford denied the allegations until her death. Several of her other children disputed Christina's account. The broad strokes of Mommy Dearest, however, have attached themselves to Crawford's legacy permanently. Joan Crawford died on May 10, 1977, in New York, at the age of 72. Number 17. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe's childhood was not a story of cruel parents so much as absent ones, a condition that produced a different kind of damage. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, was institutionalized with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia when Monroe was 7 years old and remained in and out of institutions for the rest of her life. Monroe's father was never identified with certainty. She spent her childhood moving between foster homes, at one point 12 different placements, and a brief period in the Los Angeles orphans' home. One of her foster families attempted to legally adopt her, but Gladys, on a brief period of release, refused to sign the papers, reclaimed her daughter, and then was reinstitutionalized within months. Monroe was returned to foster care. She described at least one instance of abuse by a foster parent, reported to an adult who did not believe her. She married James Doherty at 16, partly to avoid being returned to the orphanage system after the family she was staying with prepared to relocate. What Monroe carried from those years, the need for approval, the terror of abandonment, the difficulty trusting any relationship, ran through every account of her adult life given by people who knew her. Marilyn Monroe died on August 4, 1962, in Brentwood, California, at the age of 36. Number 16, Cary Grant. Cary Grant's elegance was so complete that it functioned almost as a disguise. Beneath the ease and the suits and the perfectly calibrated charm was a man named Archibald Alexander Leach, born in Bristol, England on January 18, 1904, to a family shaped by poverty and a catastrophe he did not understand until he was in his 30s. When Archie was 9 years old, his mother Elsie disappeared. He was told she had gone away, had gone somewhere, and he eventually stopped asking. His father Elias had her committed to Fish Ponds Lunatic Asylum in Bristol, where she remained institutionalized for 20 years without her son being told she was alive or where she was. Grant discovered the truth at 31 when his father was dying and finally told him. He went to find her, arranged for her release, and supported her financially for the rest of her life. The experience of having a mother who was simply removed from his life without explanation, a childhood defined by a loss that turned out not to be a loss but a concealment, informed his adult difficulty with intimacy, his multiple failed marriages, his decades of psychotherapy, and his use of LSD in the 1950s and 1960s as part of supervised therapeutic treatment. Cary Grant died on November 29, 1986 in Davenport, Iowa, at the age of 82. Number 15. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin grew up in the slums of South London in conditions of genuine Victorian poverty. His father, Charles Chaplin Sr., was an alcoholic music hall performer who died of alcohol-related illness at 37 and took almost no part in his son's upbringing. His mother, Hannah Hall, was a music hall singer who suffered from mental illness. She was institutionalized multiple times during Chaplin's childhood, and when she was not able to care for her children, they were placed in the Central London District School for Paupers, a workhouse institution that Chaplin described in his autobiography with a bitterness that made clear how thoroughly the experience marked him. Born on April 16, 1889, in London, Chaplin spent portions of his childhood in conditions ranging from grinding poverty to institutional care, depending on his mother's mental state. The little tramp he invented was, in part, a portrait of the circumstances he had come from, the threadbare dignity of a man who had nothing but refused to accept it as a definition of himself. Charlie Chaplin died on December 25, 1977, in Corsier-sur-Vevey, Switzerland, at the age of 88. Number 14. Lana Turner. Lana Turner lost her father, John Virgil Turner, to a robbery when she was 9 years old. He was killed returning home from a craps game in San Francisco, his winnings taken, his body found in the street. Her mother, Mildred, was ill-equipped to manage the grief or the practical difficulties of single parenthood during the Depression, and Turner spent portions of her childhood in the homes of various acquaintances while her mother tried to establish herself. Turner herself later described a period during which she and her mother were taken in by strangers whose behavior toward her was inappropriate and threatening, a vulnerability that came directly from her mother's inability to provide stable housing. The legend of her discovery, spotted at a drugstore counter on Sunset Boulevard, or more accurately at the Top Hat Cafe across from Hollywood High School, by a reporter named William Wilkerson, came out of a period when Turner was essentially unsupervised, cutting classes and drifting through the kind of freedom that was less freedom than neglect. What followed was 7 marriages, a scandal involving the stabbing death of her boyfriend by her daughter Cheryl, and a career that endured all of it. Lana Turner died on June 29, 1995 in Century City, California, at the age of 74. Number 13, Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner grew up in rural North Carolina as the youngest of 7 children of a sharecropper named Jonas Bailey Gardner and his wife, Mary Elizabeth. The family was not cruel in any deliberate sense, but the circumstances of Gardner's childhood, genuine poverty, the death of her father when she was 15, her mother's subsequent need to take in boarders to survive, gave her almost nothing in the way of security or guidance. Her mother sent her to New York to stay with her married sister when Gardner was 18, and a chance encounter in a studio lobby set the rest of her life in motion. She was signed to MGM without a screen test, on the strength of her appearance alone. What Gardner carried from her North Carolina childhood was a directness, a refusal to pretend to be something she was not, and a quality of self-reliance that made her both attractive and difficult to get close to. She never fully adapted to the requirements of Hollywood's social management of its stars, and spent much of her adult life finding ways to be somewhere else: Madrid, London, anywhere the industry couldn't quite reach her. Ava Gardner died on January 25, 1990 in London at the age of 67. Number 12, Bette Davis. Bette Davis's mother, Ruthie Favor Davis, is one of the more complicated figures in the history of Hollywood stage mothers. She was not cruel in the conventional sense. She genuinely believed in her daughter's talent and devoted her life to supporting it, following Bette to New York, managing her affairs, sacrificing her own comfort repeatedly. But she was also possessive, controlling, and unable to separate her own identity from her daughter's success. Davis's father, Harlow Morell Davis, left the family when Bette was 7, and Ruthie raised Bette and her sister Barbara on limited means and fierce determination. The emotional dynamic that resulted, Davis deeply attached to her mother, deeply resentful of her father's abandonment, accustomed to the energy that obsessive maternal attention produces, is visible in the intensity she brought to every screen performance she ever gave. Her sister Barbara, who suffered from mental illness throughout her life, was a source of guilt and financial obligation that Davis managed quietly for decades. The family she came from and the obligations it created were never far below the surface of her public life. Bette Davis died on October 6, 1989, in Neuilly-sur-Seine, France, at the age of 81. Number 11, Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift's mother, Ethel Sonny Clift, was a woman of fierce social ambition and a particular fixation on her twin children, Monty and his sister Roberta, that was less nurturing than possessive. She had spent her early life pursuing a social standing she felt had been denied her, and she channeled that pursuit through her children's appearance, behavior, and social performance with an intensity that gave them very little room to exist outside her design for them. Clift was born on October 17, 1920, in Omaha, Nebraska. His mother moved the family to Europe when the twins were young, orchestrating their education and social exposure in ways that served her vision of who they should become rather than who they were. The psychological cost of that particular kind of upbringing, being managed rather than loved, was paid across Clift's adult life in alcohol, prescription drug dependency, a series of relationships that he could not sustain, and a closeted homosexuality that the era made impossible to live openly. He was injured in a car accident in 1956, leaving his face permanently altered, and the last decade of his career, during which he continued to give performances of extraordinary depth, was conducted in visible deterioration. Montgomery Clift died on July 23, 1966, in New York City at the age of 45. The cause was an occlusive coronary artery disease. He had been working on a film with John Huston, The Defector, which was completed before his death. Number 10. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer's relationship with her mother, Lillian Van Ornum Farmer, is one of the most documented and most devastating in Hollywood history. Lillian was controlling, religiously intense, and had a specific vision of her daughter as an extension of her own identity that left no room for Frances to be a separate person. Born on September 19, 1913 in Seattle, Washington, Farmer won a national essay contest as a teenager with a piece titled "God Dies," which caused a local scandal that Lillian managed with investment in the attention it generated. When Farmer went to Hollywood and began building a genuine career, she appeared in Come and Get It in 1936, and with Gary Cooper, Lillian followed and inserted herself into every part of her daughter's professional life. When Farmer's behavior became erratic in the early 1940s, a combination of alcohol and a temperament entirely unsuited to Hollywood's management expectations, it was Lillian who had her committed to Western State Hospital in Steilacoom, Washington, where Farmer spent years in conditions that were, by any account, brutal. Farmer was released in 1950, eventually returned to public life as a television host in Indianapolis, and wrote a memoir, Will There Really Be a Morning?, published posthumously in 1972. Frances Farmer died on August 1, 1970 in Indianapolis, Indiana, at the age of 56 from esophageal cancer. Number 9. Gene Tierney. Gene Tierney's family had social ambitions that overrode every other consideration. Her father, Howard Tierney, was a successful insurance broker in Connecticut who had the specific kind of upper-middle-class authority that treated his children's lives as assets to be managed. When Gene showed aptitude and beauty, Howard Tierney did not direct her toward Columbia University, where she had been accepted. He redirected her toward Hollywood, formed a corporation to manage her earnings, and put himself in control of her professional income. Born on November 19, 1920 in Brooklyn, New York, Tierney was launched into the film industry by her father's networking and business approach. The arrangement gave her career a structure and a backing that many performers lacked, while ensuring that the financial rewards were distributed in ways she had limited control over. Her adult life brought suffering that had nothing to do with her family. A fan who infected her with rubella during pregnancy, which caused her daughter Daria to be born with severe disabilities. That loss, and a subsequent romantic relationship with John F. Kennedy that ended when his family determined that marrying her was politically unsuitable, contributed to a mental breakdown and multiple hospitalizations in the 1950s. Gene Tierney died on November 6, 1991 in Houston, Texas, at the age of 70. Number 8. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney's mother, Nell Carter, managed his career with a thoroughness that began when he was a toddler and never really stopped. He began performing as Joe Yule Jr., his birth name, before he was 2 years old, appearing in his parents' vaudeville act. By the time he was signed to MGM in the mid-1930s and became Andy Hardy and then the highest-grossing star in Hollywood, Nell had been running his professional life for over a decade. Born on September 23, 1920 in Brooklyn, New York, Rooney spent his childhood entirely in service of a career that his mother had decided on, before he could form an opinion about it. The financial management of his MGM years, during which he was one of the most valuable properties in the industry, left him with almost nothing by the time the contract ended. Whether the mismanagement was deliberate or simply careless has been argued by Rooney's biographers without definitive resolution. He married 8 times, a number that reflects, in part, what a childhood without ordinary domestic life looks like when it arrives in adulthood as a series of replacements for something that was never there. Mickey Rooney died on April 6, 2014 in North Hollywood, California, at the age of 93. Number 7. Ginger Rogers. Ginger Rogers' mother, Layla Imogene Owens McMath, was one of the most formidable of the Hollywood stage mothers, a woman who followed her daughter to Hollywood, installed herself in the industry as a drama coach and talent scout, and maintained a presence in Ginger's professional and personal life that went well beyond ordinary maternal involvement. Born Virginia Catherine McMath in Independence, Missouri, on July 16, 1911, Rogers was performing in vaudeville from childhood, managed by her mother with a completeness that included selecting her professional partners, approving her roles, and actively intervening in her relationships. Layla's interference in Rogers' romances was a documented feature of her adult life. She disapproved of several significant relationships and made her disapproval functional rather than merely expressed. The professional result was extraordinary. Rogers danced with Fred Astaire across 10 films and won the Academy Award for Best Actress for Kitty Foyle in 1940. Rogers addressed her mother in her autobiography with more diplomacy than anger, choosing to describe her as a devoted champion. Ginger Rogers died on April 25, 1995, in Rancho Mirage, California, at the age of 83. Number 6. James Dean. James Dean's mother, Mildred Marie Wilson Dean, died of uterine cancer on July 14, 1940, when Dean was 9 years old. His father, Winton Dean, unable or unwilling to raise the boy alone, sent him to live with his sister and her husband, Hortense and Marcus Winslow, in Fairmount, Indiana. He did not return for 9 years, appearing again in Dean's life only after his son had become famous. Dean's relationship with his father's abandonment, the specific act of being sent away by a surviving parent who was capable of caring for him but chose not to, was something he carried and returned to throughout his short life. His relationship with director Elia Kazan, with actor James Whitmore, who encouraged him toward the actor's studio, and with a series of older men who functioned as substitute fathers, was shaped directly by what his actual father had done. He was killed on September 30th, 1955, at the age of 24, in a car accident near Cholame, California. He had completed East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant. The third film was still in post-production when he died. Number 5. Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr's father, Emil Kiesler, was a loving presence in her early childhood in Vienna. Her relationship with him was the warmest of her early life, and his death when she was a young adult left a void she spent decades attempting to fill. Her mother, Gertrude Trude Lichtwitz, was more distant, more social, and less attuned to the daughter who had inherited her father's intellectual curiosity rather than her mother's social ease. Born Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler in Vienna on November 9, 1914, Lamarr's first marriage, at 19, to Friedrich Mandl, an Austrian arms manufacturer who was controlling to the point of imprisoning her socially, monitoring her movements, and collecting every print of her controversial early film Ecstasy to prevent its exhibition, was the most damaging relationship of her early life and the one she fled most dramatically, escaping Mandl's household in 1937 and making her way to London and then Hollywood. The intelligence she brought to her second career, she co-developed a frequency-hopping signal system with composer George Antheil during World War II that anticipated modern spread-spectrum communication technology, contributing to what eventually became Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth, was entirely self-directed and entirely invisible to the industry that employed her primarily as a face. Hedy Lamarr died on January 19, 2000 in Castleberry, Florida, at the age of 85. Number 4. Orson Welles. Orson Welles' mother, Beatrice Ives Wells, was a concert pianist of real ability who recognized in her son a prodigious intelligence and devoted herself to its cultivation. She died when Wells was 9 years old. His father, Richard Head Wells, was a charming, financially unreliable inventor who responded to his wife's death by drinking heavily and taking his son on extended travels that were less education than evasion. Born on May 6, 1915, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Wells was pronounced a genius by the adults around him from childhood, a designation that removed him from ordinary expectations and placed him in a category where the only adequate performance was extraordinary. After his father's death in 1930, his guardian, Dr. Morris Bernstein, attempted to provide structure, but Wells was by then self-directed in ways that made structure difficult to impose. He made Citizen Kane at 25. The career that followed, brilliant, erratic, financially chaotic, perpetually compromised by studios that funded and then abandoned his project, was the adult version of the childhood he had had. Enormous potential, operating without reliable support. Orson Welles died on October 10, 1985, in Los Angeles, at the age of 70. Number 3. Sophia Loren. Sophia Loren's father, Riccardo Ciccolone, refused to marry her mother, Romilda Villani, despite fathering 2 daughters by her. He acknowledged Sophia's paternity only under legal pressure, and the acknowledgement was purely formal. He provided no financial support, no emotional presence, and no relationship worth the name. He occasionally surfaced to make demands on the career his daughter had built without his participation. Born Sofia Villani Ciccolone in Rome on September 20, 1934, Loren grew up in Pozzuoli near Naples, in poverty made more precarious by her father's refusal to accept any responsibility. Her mother's family provided what support was available. The war years brought Allied bombardment of the area around Pozzuoli. Loren later described running for shelter during air raids as a child, an experience of physical fear that left its mark. The career she built, starting with beauty pageants, entered partly from economic necessity, leading to Italian cinema, leading to international stardom, leading to the Academy Award for 2 women in 1962, was built entirely on her own effort and her own talent, with no foundation from the father who had declined to be one. Sophia Loren is 90 years old in 2026. Number 2. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson's stepfather, Wallace Fitzgerald, was physically abusive, a fact that Hudson disclosed in carefully managed fragments across his career and that his biographers have documented more completely. Born Roy Harold Scherer Jr. on November 17, 1925, in Winnetka, Illinois, Hudson was 3 years old when his parents divorced and 9 when his mother Kay remarried. Fitzgerald's treatment of the boy was harsh enough that Hudson left home as soon as he was able and effectively severed contact. His adult life was structured around a concealment, which the studio system that signed him required be kept invisible and which his public persona was specifically constructed to maintain. The management of that concealment, across decades of films and public appearances and managed relationships, required a level of sustained performance that left its own kind of damage. He was diagnosed with AIDS in 1984 and disclosed his diagnosis publicly in July 1985, one of the first major public figures to do so, at a time when the epidemic had already killed tens of thousands of people and the mainstream press had largely treated the disease as something that happened to other kinds of people. Rock Hudson died on October 2, 1985, in Beverly Hills, California, at the age of 59. Number 1. Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead lost her mother, Adelaide Eugenia Sledge, 3 weeks after she was born. Her father, William Brockman Bankhead, who later became Speaker of the House of Representatives, was absent through most of her childhood, occupied by his political career. She was raised primarily by her paternal grandparents in Alabama, and later by various relatives, in an atmosphere of Southern social propriety that had nothing to accommodate a child of her temperament. Born on January 31st, 1902, in Huntsville, Alabama, Bankhead was ungovernable from childhood, not from malice, but from an excess of energy and appetite that the world around her had no framework for. She sent her photograph to a film magazine at 15, won a contest, and used the result as leverage to get herself sent to New York, where she built a theatrical career of genuine distinction, becoming one of the most celebrated stage performers of her generation in London before Broadway recognized her. Her later life, the drinking, the various substances, the legendary parties, the voice, the aggressive self-revelation, was the product of someone raised without the specific guidance that might have helped her manage herself, and who built a brilliant career anyway. Tallulah Bankhead died on December 12, 1968, in New York City at the age of 66, from pneumonia complicated by emphysema. The childhoods in this list span continents and decades: Vienna in the 20s, South London at the turn of the century, Depression-era Alabama, the sharecropping farms of North Carolina. What connects them is simpler and more consistent than geography or era. Children who were neglected, used, abandoned, or controlled by the adults who were supposed to protect them, and who went on to build careers from the wreckage of that beginning. Some became the most celebrated performers the industry ever produced. Some destroyed themselves slowly. Some found their way to something resembling peace. All of them carried what they came from into everything they ever did on screen, whether the audience knew it or not. If this kind of Hollywood history is what brings you here, hit that like button and subscribe. There is a lot more coming.